Hi, my name's Phil. I like talking about politics, and in this video I'd like to discuss a pretty major U-turn from Boris Johnson and how it just demonstrates how sick the public are with the government's double standards. As an aside, from an announcement to U-turn was less than 3 hours. This may be the fastest U-turn in history. But first, if you'd like to be notified of daily news in politics, please subscribe to the channel and click the bell notification icon. So today is Freedom Day. Today is Freedom Day. We have a third wave that is already out of control, a government which is isolating after a colleague contracted COVID, yet now appears to be the perfect time to remove what few measures remain in place. We were supposed to be getting a ghastly speech from Boris Johnson today, hailing the end of his roadmap. We have at least been spared that. But yesterday I was talking about my disappointment with Keir Starmer's failure to take the opportunity to hammer the Health Secretary over his COVID madness in the light of his positive test. I mentioned that Boris Johnson and Rishi Sunak had said that they were not going to isolate. Now, this was a second dropping of the ball from the government in the space of 2 days. People let the Tories get away with all sorts of nonsense. I get what it looks like from the outside, and even sometimes from the inside. We look like a nation of sheeple, subservient serfs who just doff our caps and tug our forelocks to our gentrified rulers. But the British public actually hate double standards. They just don't see enough of the Tories' double standards. They're blind to them. But when the government say that you must isolate if you test positive to COVID to save lives, when they ram it down our throats all the time, and then when called to do it themselves, they say, no, we're exempt. That's a double standard that is obvious even to the most blinkered. Yesterday morning, I woke to the news that Sunak and Johnson weren't going to isolate because they were taking part in a pilot scheme that meant they didn't have to. You what? Now, I'd heard about this pilot scheme actually earlier last week, but I have questions. What is its operating hypothesis and how is it supposed to be tested exactly? Where is the paper on it? See, the idea is that what they do is they replace isolation with daily testing instead. But we're scaling testing back, and we're scaling testing back at just the time when we're going to need a lot more testing because there's going to be more people developing symptoms. So where's the feasibility with this? How can you test a scheme that relies on massively expanding the use of testing when you're actually reducing the capacity to test? Or was it something that was just made up by ministers because they knew that, like millions of people around the country, they were suddenly going to start pinging by the app to tell them to isolate, and they thought to themselves, oh, well, we don't really fancy following the rules that we made for everyone else. Then news started to filter through. First, the Chancellor, Rishi Sunak, said that he would be self-isolating after all and not taking part in this pilot rubbish. Then from Boris Johnson as well. And this had all the hallmarks of the many U-turns Johnson had to make last year. Though this was so rapid, I think it broke the world record. Now, sometimes a government will have to U-turn on something because opposition grows. It's not a stupid thing from the outset. It wasn't necessarily evident that the policy, when it was first announced, would be really unpopular. It's just that sometimes conditions can change whilst it's being progressed, and unexpectedly then there's a load of opposition to it. But this is not how Johnson's U-turns generally go. There are a couple of characteristics of his that are generally absent from others. First of all, they tend to represent policies that don't actually provide any benefit to anyone. I don't just mean the general public, but I mean even the government. Consider, for example, their policy of denying meals to starving kids during the school holidays. Costs nothing, really, to fund that. You know, it didn't mean abandoning other spending plans. They only pursued this policy of hunger out of spite. Or the Barnard Castle affair, rallying around Dominic Cummings. Again, what benefit did that do the government? None at all. None at all. Now, usually when a government tries to push a policy that ultimately fails, it was motivated by doing something of benefit, whether to the public, that they believe it's a benefit to the public, maybe they're right, maybe they're wrong, or benefit to themselves. You know, it just ends up not being what most would consider a benefit, and so opposition grows. This wasn't of benefit to anyone. Just like Sunak or Johnson not isolating, how does it benefit the government? It doesn't. They can easily do their jobs in isolation. They can still talk to the people they need to talk to via remote means. They can still make decisions, assuming they can be bothered. They can even still receive their red boxes. Not that there'd be any problem with doing that digitally anyway. And this is what makes them so easy to U-turn on. Because you have this risk-reward calculation, don't you? You know, and the risk goes up, but is the payout good enough? But given when there's no payout, well, you only need a little bit of risk to go, well, it's not worth it then. And then hence the number of U-turns. The second feature, I think, and this is most crucially important, is that they are always policies that anyone with any brains can see is going to be deeply unpopular. Even Tory MPs were aghast at the prospects of the starving kids during a pandemic last year. Yes, many, though not all, publicly went along with it because they don't fundamentally care, but they could still see the electoral damage and urged the government to change course. The same is likely here. It wouldn't surprise me if Tory MPs were furiously WhatsApping Johnson or the whips to let them know what a disaster this would be. People who pay attention to British politics understand that people hate the idea of one rule for us, another for the rest. Boris Johnson and Nigel Farage are absolutely great examples of very posh, privileged and entitled little pricks who have cultivated very deliberately an image of being the jolly chap down the pub, the ordinary bloke on the street. They understand that people identify with someone who's one of them, not some gilded ruler, so they pretend to be one of them. And yet, they announced this pilot rubbish thinking they'd get away with it. Boris Johnson, who understands how he needs to present himself, thought he'd get away with it. After being forced into quite a lot of U-turns last year, more than any other government I'm going to bet with such a majority, they still thought they could pull a wheeze to let them get away with a period of isolation that doesn't even affect them as much as it would you or I. I mean, Johnson is at Chequers, a magnificent luxury country retreat with acres of land. Anyone else going there would think it was a holiday. Anyone else going there and told it's just going to be them and their family would think it was a private holiday. He gets very expensive food taken to him, doesn't even have to pay for it. He has acres of grounds, huge house to wander about. Now, I don't know where Rishi Sunak is based. His own home is also decked out for luxury. He's very wealthy. But it is possible that he's in the flat at Downing Street. That would be more restrictive, but still no worse than most would have to experience in isolation. And still with an army of staff to help him manage, albeit from a distance. We assume, because I do have to say, just because they say they're isolating, doesn't necessarily mean they are. And in some ways, it is quite heartening to see this, really, because it means that Boris Johnson hasn't actually improved his political advice since Dominic Cummings left. He's still capable of annoying the public. Frankly, even the suggestion from senior ministers that they should come up with a scheme that justifies their ability to avoid the rules would have been instantly shot down by competent advisers. Yesterday, I called into question the quality of Labour's advisers after Saturday's fiasco. But that was disappointing, because I want those advisers to do a good job. Now I'm in a different situation. I'm in a similar position of pointing to what is likely to have been poor political advice. But because it's for the Tories, I'm quite pleased. I never claimed I wasn't biased, sort of in the title. But following on from what I said yesterday, Labour still need to grasp the nettle here. You know, they did. Both, there was several members of the front bench, including Keir Starmer, absolutely jumped on this. Thank goodness. But there was others as well. There was a political commentator that I follow quite closely, good old Nick, saying that this is the sort of thing that could lead to the fall of Johnson. Not be the end of him, but the beginning of the end, he said. Not on its own is what I would say. Part of the domino effect maybe. But the thing is, we saw this last year. This weekend has been no more damaging than a few of the things that happened last year, like Barnard Castle, for example, like the starving kids, like test and trace failures. Johnson's still here. So this won't even touch Johnson unless Tory MPs believe that he has changed from an electoral asset to a liability. This will not occur until the polls show the Conservatives in a losing position. Because here's the situation at the moment. The public are outraged at what the government's done, again. But you say to the public, so will you vote for someone else? I'm not sure anyone else is better. That's the problem. That is the problem. So what needs to happen is the public need to think, yeah, we're going to vote for these other guys instead. And then The polls, not in a snapshot of time, but for a sustained, seemingly irreversible period of time, will show the Conservatives behind. And for that, it's not enough for people to agree that Johnson doesn't make the best government. Labour need to convince them that theirs would be better. So we still need Labour to capitalise on this, which they did, in a way that they missed out on Saturday. And they also need to capitalise on the next time Johnson does this, and the next time. It needs to be relentless pressure. Boris Johnson will continue to mess up. He can't help himself. He thinks government is a game where the aim is to give himself as much pleasure as possible. He's not laying the foundations for some grand plan, some image of a future UK. He's just doing what he's done all his life. He's engaging in short-term self-gratification. So he will always trigger scandals. Tory MPs know this. They believe they can afford it because nobody seems to make them pay for it. Make them pay for it and Johnson's end will come. And when it does, it will come suddenly and brutally. Not the long protracted end that was Theresa May's prime ministerial career, because she had some respect in the party. But within a few weeks, if the clown is seen as an electoral liability. All we need to do is make the Tories pay for every scandal involving Johnson. And there will be several a week at least. Starmer, like I say, to his credit, did take this opportunity at least. He said that the Conservatives were like bank robbers giving back the money when they got caught, that they fixed the rules for themselves and only backtracked when they got caught out. Just need him to point this out every day. Don't let them get away with anything. We do not train to be merciful in this dojo. As for the latest humiliation for the government, they won't learn anything. Don't be thinking that they'll be chastened by the experience and a bit more discreet next time, because that's what a normal person would do. Oh God, that went badly wrong. I better rethink next time. They won't. They've had a lifetime of never having to pay for consequences. This is just the latest in a long line of brazenly setting themselves up against their own rules. They just miscalculated the level of opposition. They will miscalculate again. And finally, I should also make mention of the fact that although this is not unwelcome news politically, it does on a serious level create a very real problem. There was already a fear, again expressed by Starmer recently, that people would delete the app rather than risk being told to isolate during this flourishing third wave, because a lot of people are being pinged and a lot more people are going to be soon. Just the news that the Prime Minister wanted to ignore his own app will only encourage others to do the same. And then right on cue, Dan Hodges, who works for the Mail, said publicly that he'd be deleting his app. This will only encourage others to do likewise. The UTurn may act to put the brakes on a mass deletion, but inevitably some will have done so on the strength of this episode. Damage is done. But those are my thoughts. Let me know yours in the comments below. Hope you found the video interesting. If you did, don't forget to click the like button. And if you'd like to support the channel further, please also click the Patreon link for details. And until next time, I'll see you later.